Life and Legacy of Mary Virginia Merrick, founder of the Christ Child Society. I'm Molly Fanning, a member of the Columbus, Ohio chapter, and serve you as the National Christ Child Society board member. Please share this recording with others. And now I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Patty Myler. Patty was our national president from 2010 to 2012 and is a member of the Washington, D.C. chapter and currently serves as our national historian and is on the Canonization Advisory Board. She has recently received the Mary Virginia Merrick Award from her chapter in recognition of her extraordinary service beyond the duties of her many positions held through the years. Patty's a lifelong history with the Christ Child Society, with her grandmother, mother, and daughters also members. So she's the perfect presenter for our historic history of the life and legacy of Mary Virginia Merrick. Patty.
Thank you, Molly. Welcome. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. It is always a pleasure to share with fellow Christ Child members about our founder, Mary Virginia Merrick. I would like to begin my presentation today quoting from a booklet called The Early Years of the Christ Child Society, a booklet written after Mary Virginia Merrick's death by her sister Mildred Merrick. Mildred said, "To reach back into the beginnings of any great work is to seek first the inspiration which motivated it. This is not an easy task, but I shall endeavor to tell the story in its sequence, the origin, the growth, development, and God's blessings on the work through the years." The beginning was not spectacular, but rather began as a small seed planted in the heart of a child. It was evident that early in her life, Mary had dedicated herself to God, not knowing where this dedication would lead. As the years succeeded one another, this consecration of self found expression in service to the least fortunate little ones of his flock. Having a capacity for great love and intense sympathy, the realization of the many infants born into the world in abject poverty was a challenge to be met. This was the Master's call to action, love in the heart of a child for Christ, the child lover. This was the inspiration that gave birth to the Christ Child Society. It is difficult to realize the extreme poverty existing in Washington in the 1880s and 90s. There were areas of slums, unpaved streets and alleys, and many destitute and scantily clothed children. With such a wide field to cover, it was almost impossible to discover where help was most needed. Charity in those days was not organized, save for a small St. Vincent de Paul Society, the only Catholic relief agency operating in the city. Mary's mother had served as an early example for her, when after much begging from Mary, she allowed her to accompany her on some of her trips to assist the poor. Later, her friend Miss Leonide Delarue served as her inspiration. In her eagerness and perplexity, Mary turned to this faithful friend, one who equally shared her love for the poor, as she had early acquainted with many families of poverty in downtown Washington and had shared with them her own slender means. Through this contact made early in Mary's life, Miss Delarue became her most valuable helper in her budding endeavor to end poverty. She helped guide Mary's efforts along the right channels. Miss Delarue's name is the first that appears in the first roster of the Society. There she is listed as Chairman of Visitors, serving on the first Board of Managers, and she continued to work with the Society until her death in 1916. While Mary's strong Catholic faith and her parents were certainly the focal point of her inspiration to help the poor, she also credited Charles Dickens with awakening her social conscience. As a young girl, Mary had everything that the world prizes. She was born of privilege to prominent and socially conscious parents who loved her and her siblings very much. She lost everything she really cared about as a teenager when she suffered a fall from the family playhouse. Her sister Mildred wrote, "In her girlhood, a physical handicap destined her to a life of invalidism, but her valiant spirit overcame all handicaps, and following the light of the Star of Bethlehem, she led countless souls into the field of social service, where in the child of poverty they found Christ himself, the babe of Bethlehem." Her spinal paralysis grew worse over the following years, leaving it necessary for her to always be in a recumbent position, in bed or in a reclining wheelchair. In her later years, she needed to wear a heavy metal back brace just to be able to sit up in a wheelchair. This paralysis also ended her early dreams of becoming a sister of charity. However, she did not let her situation break her spirit. Her devout Catholic faith led her to realize that her desire to care for the Christ child could still be fulfilled by caring for the poor, particularly children. And her charitable and social reform efforts began, with her first efforts being to provide clothing for a needy baby due at Christmas, whose family Miss Delarue had told her about. This was to be done through a layette venture. She gathered her friends and relatives together to make handmade clothing to fill the layette for the baby, and doing this while lying on her back, her hands held high over her head. Such a humble beginning, one layette first, other handmade clothing, and many layettes later. So many of the activities of our society grew from small beginnings. The following year at Christmas, realizing another need, she again gathered together her pioneer group of friends and family, and after receiving Christmas letters addressed to the Christ child, they provided gifts for 17 children. All were marked simply, "From the Christ child," as Mary saw him as the giver of all gifts. These gifts included a red wagon for Paul, an errand boy her father had assigned to her, who was expecting no Christmas gift that year because his family was too poor. As you know, that red wagon has become a familiar Christ child symbol today. The Christmas giving program continued to grow, and at one point in time, over 3,000 gifts were distributed by the Washington chapter alone. Years later, Bishop McNamara commented to her, "You brought the Christ child back into Christmas." In 1885, she began her Friendly Visitors program. This was an attempt to identify and verify the needs that still needed to be filled for the poor in the city. These women, her friends and relations, went out into the homes of the children they were serving with layettes, clothing, and Christmas giving, looking for other needs. They were then in contact with her, and she would then coordinate the resources to fill the needs reported. This work was also done with the help of her dear friend and mentor, Miss Delarue. A short time later, both of her parents passed away in short succession, and she became the guardian of her 6 siblings, as well as the task of managing her parents' estate, all while starting her beloved Christ Child Society. She later said that this helped her gain valuable experience for the role she would later take on in the society. By 1887, the society was being organized on a more formal basis, with Mary, then aged 19, serving as its president. Although the society's original work centered around providing layettes and handmade clothing for children in need, its services kept growing as the needs in the community were so great. In 1881, after seeing the poor health that many of the children being served were in, she began the Fresh Air Fund to send children suffering from ill health to farms in the country. That first summer, 41 children recommended by the Friendly Visitors as needing country air and good food were boarded in Brookland farmhouses. Mary said, "Here in God's open country, health and character were developed." The success of the fresh air work later led to the purchase of a farm and eventually to the operation of summer camps and a convalescent hospital, which in later years became a residential treatment center for emotionally disturbed children. The annual report of 1891 added to the aims of the society, "Fresh Air, a charity whose object is to secure to those little ones for whom ill health or the unfavorable conditions of home life render it beneficial, a 2-week stay in the country during the summer months." By 1898, the Society's programs were growing more varied, and the need to rent space became obvious, as the Society had outgrown the Merrick home. So she rented a building and hired the first-time part-time paid worker. The continued growth of the Society in Washington, its list of donors and expanding operations, led her to seek legal recognition as an organization, And in 1903, the Christ Child Society was officially incorporated in Washington, D.C., with laws, bylaws, and a constitution. This move allowed the society to act through its officers and to hold property and receive legacies. Quoting from the charter, the particular business and object of the society, to improve by useful instruction and charitable relief the condition of the poor children of the District of Columbia. At this time, the society adopted as its motto, Laborare est orare, to labor is to pray. The symbol she adopted for the society was the sacred image of the Christ child raising his hand in benediction. Mary Virginia Merrick sought to keep the society's early efforts organized, and the visiting committee published its first annual report in 1890. I am a sixth-generation Washingtonian, and one of my most exciting moments upon becoming your national president was going through early records in the national office and finding a copy of one of the early Christ Child annual reports, the report from 1905-1906. And there finding listed as members the names of my great-grandmother and her 3 daughters. One of her daughters was also listed as chairing the library committee as well as serving on the board of managers. I then knew that they had most likely worked closely with Mary Virginia Merrick and that they had been active with the settlement center located at St. Dominic's Church, their parish in Southwest Washington. My own 2 daughters are now members of the Washington chapter, and one recently served on the Washington chapter's board, carrying on our own family's Christ Child legacy today. The Society's programs continued to grow at a rapid pace, and by 1904, there were 5 settlement centers operating in rented space in the city of Washington. Most settlement work prior to the societies was done by Protestant or secular groups, and the Christ Child Society was a Catholic response to this popular settlement movement. Providing religious instruction was only one goal among many. Sewing classes, English classes, libraries, recreational facilities, and more were all also being provided. Many of the Society's earliest programs were designed to meet the needs of the many Italian immigrants coming to Washington to build early government buildings, and their needs were great. In 1905, Cardinal Gibbons placed in the Society's hands the care and spiritual guidance of the Italian immigrants living in poverty in the Union Station area, and the center was open to provide social, spiritual, and cultural activities. The Society often coordinated its efforts with other agencies, such as the St. Vincent de Paul Society, district nurses, area churches, and others providing relief in the city. This practice was unusual in the day. All were cooperating in order to meet the needs of poor children. This often included her own members providing occasional shelter for children awaiting juvenile court dates, as well as providing medical and dental assistance, even providing job opportunities for the older settlement children. Washington was a segregated southern city, yet as early as 1913, an auxiliary was being formed in the society through St. Augustine's Church, which allowed Black Catholic women to become involved in the society and allowing them to better help their own race in various ways. Mary believed firmly in serving all children, no matter their race or creed. The Society's location in Washington, D.C. caught the attention of the national community, and contributions were made to the Society by First Ladies Frances Cleveland and Carolyn Harrison, who sent substantial donations in the early days of the Society. In 1938, Eleanor Roosevelt wrote about the work of the Society in her My Daily column, a column in the Washington Daily News. The article was titled, "She Began by Making One Child Happy," and was written after her visit to the Society's convalescent home in Rockville, Maryland, and neighborhood house, a settlement house in Southwest Washington. Her sister Mildred noted, although no special effort was made to extend the work of the Society, it was gradually being recognized in other cities. In many cases, the seed for expansion was sown by students who had participated in Christ Child activities while attending college in Washington. Others were the wives of congressional or other government leaders connected to Capitol Hill and the young federal government, who, when they returned to their home districts, started their own Christ Child groups modeled on the society in Washington. In 1905, she invited the branches that had formed in other cities to join her in creating the National Christ Child Society. The first article in the new bylaws described her hope for the National Society: to improve by instruction and relief the condition of children in need, regardless of sex, race, or creed, carried on by lay men and women on Catholic principles. By 1908, there were 7 branches formed outside of the Washington, D.C. area, including Baltimore, Maryland, New York, Omaha, Nebraska, Worcester, Massachusetts, Chicago, Illinois, Toledo, Ohio, and Ellicott City, Maryland. As the branches continued to grow around the nation, her vision and the characteristics of the founding chapter, mainly its flexibility in responding to local needs, were replicated across the country. And 8 years later, in 1916, there were branches in 24 cities, even across the seas, as in 1911, a branch was created in the Philippines, and later in 1946 in The Hague, Netherlands. However, neither international chapter remains active today. The first meeting of the national directors of the Christ Child Society was held in the Merrick home in 1927, where she was elected national president, a position she held until poor health led to her resignation in 1948. However, she remained president of the Washington chapter until her death in 1955. In 1953, the National Christ Child Society incorporated separately, and thereafter the national organization was responsible for organizing the conventions, conferences, and other meetings at which representatives from the chapters reviewed the National Society's activities and budget and authorized a national board and officers to represent them. Mary Virginia Merrick was certainly a woman ahead of her time. She was a lay woman in the post-Reconstruction South, focused from the earliest beginnings on serving children in need regardless of race or creed. As the decades passed, the society continued to meet neighborhood and operational challenges. As a national organization, the branches were tasked with finding and responding to the needs of children in their own communities. Yet, they were still under her leadership, both spiritually and materially. She was writing its publications, raising funds to carry on its work, and acting as the chief spokesperson of the society to other Catholic organizations. As 25 years of social service by the society came to a close, Mary wrote, "The work of these years, running like a golden thread from its first beginning to the present time, shows the same spirit of love for the Christ child, which gave birth to the society, and still actuates its members in their devoted work for Christ and his needy little ones." A letter of congratulations from Archbishop Curley at the time read in part, "You are doing a necessary piece of work for the little ones, so dear to the heart of Christ. I do not know of any organization that can take the place of the Christ Child Society." Those 25 years of outstanding work were crowned by the bestowal of the coveted Laetare Medal on our president by Notre Dame University, which ranked her with the most distinguished Catholics in the country. The medal citation read, "Miss Merrick's name is known and her work understood and valued more widely than is the case with many, if another Catholic woman in this country. Few Catholics will be found in the United States whose personal merit is greater, whose life of half so noble, or whose distinctive work on the national activities of the Church means more. Her range of intellectual interests is large, and her appreciation of life and literature is extremely accurate and balanced. Her disposition is wonderful and cheerful. There is a wholesomeness and naturalness about her that is nothing short of marvelous. In announcing Miss Merrick, therefore, the Laetare Medal of 1915, Notre Dame honors herself and proclaims Miss Merrick an honor to our country, a benefactress of mankind, and living glory to the Catholic Church." Her life is certainly a role model for us. An article written in the Southern Guardian magazine upon her receiving the Laetare Award said it well. "Her life is a wonderful triumph of character over affliction, a marvelous example of industry, ambition, and force, in the presence of 10,000 reasons, which would easily have excused aimlessness and indifference. I would now like to share with you a brief video of Father Hesburgh, former president of the University of Notre Dame, that was made 6 weeks before his death. Although Father Hesburgh never met Mary, he had volunteered at one of the Christ Child settlement houses in Washington while a seminarian studying at Catholic University. So we know that he was personally aware of the good work being done by the Society under her guidance. Unfortunately, the sound quality is not strong in the video, so please turn the volume up on your computer or phone. You will be able to hear this video better when the presentation is located on the website.
She led the way. She gave a great example to all of us, not just women, but men as well. Said she looked at the difficult projects that were mostly run by men at her time, and being a woman, they probably said, "Oh, oh, what's she doing here?" The fact is, her project has to be one of the finest I've ever seen. The Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., or the Church at large.
In 1937, as the Society celebrated 50 years of dedicated service to the physical needs and religious guidance of countless children and youth in Washington and across the country, a 2-day celebration was planned, and it opened with a celebration of a Mass at the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament in Washington, her home parish. The crowning event was the announcement of the bestowal of the distinguished Cross Pro Ecclesia et Pontifice on Mary Virginia Merrick for her labor and exemplary fashion for the Catholic Church by Pope Pius XI. During her lifetime, she received other recognitions and awards besides the Laetare Medal and the Cross Pro Ecclesia et Pontifice Medal. She also received the Siena Medal, which was awarded to her by the National Council of Catholic Women. This award is awarded yearly by Theta Phi Alpha Catholic Sorority to the outstanding Catholic woman in the country. The Distinguished Service Medal from the Cosmopolitan Club of Washington. She was the first woman to receive this award. An honorary doctoral degree from Georgetown University in 1949. But her belief in the work of her volunteers was what mattered most to her. While she founded the Christ Child Society to provide relief, she saw service as intertwined with a relationship to the community. Her many writings validate the dignity of all. They declared that happiness could be attained regardless of circumstances. She recognized that living a life of true value did not require luxury or notoriety, and she acknowledged the lifelong battle of conscience that is essential for every person to undertake with courage. As I said earlier, she was a woman ahead of her time, a laywoman in the post-Reconstruction South, focused from the earliest beginnings on serving all children in need, regardless of race or creed. Mary Virginia Merrick strongly believed that a balance was necessary between scientific charity and keeping the work simple, spiritual, and responsive to the local needs. She said, "The tiny seed sown in the field of charity held a principle of life, and its growth and development met a real need." The Society built strong working relationships with other early Catholic sociology pioneers, especially those who argued to professionalize social work. The Society worked closely with Catholic University, and it annually held roundtables talks for the Society's volunteers. She hoped these talks would inform the volunteers' work in the field. In 1915, the discussion topic was record keeping in charity work, a challenge you will probably agree we still face today when you are filling in your annual President's Report. One of her passions was writing books and stories for children, and she insisted on teaching the life of Christ to all children who participated in the Society's settlement programs, so that they might meet the master of the house and might come to know Christ personally, so that he might become for them an ideal and a loving example for their daily lives, developing in their hearts a great love for him. She sought to bring new life to the stories and teachings of the gospel, so that they might be of greater interest to the children the Society served. She translated, wrote, and published numerous books and articles to help integrate the lessons found in the Catechism and the Gospels, as well as to raise funds for the Society. These writings included The Life of Christ, The Altar of God, Come Unto Me, as well as her Aunt Kate letters, her Marjorie stories, and other published essays. Last year, I was in search of a copy of a book that I learned she had used in forming the Christ Child prayer that we all know so well today. I had seen a reference to this book in a letter she had written to the founder of the Boston chapter as she was guiding her on forming the chapter. In her letter, she had included the Christ Child prayer, noting that the prayer was from Mysteries of the Mass and Reasoned Prayer by Father W. Roach, S.J., first written in 1925. I found a copy of the book online and ordered it. To my surprise, when it arrived, there were 2 copies in the envelope. One was the first printing, which is now in the National Office. The second copy was a newer printing, and when I opened it, I found inscribed on the front page, "To Patty with love, Mary." Now, you can imagine the chills that went down my spine, as she was certainly showing her presence to me at the time. In a letter to her members shortly before her death, she wrote, "I am happy to note that this cause has been maintained through the zeal and interest of the members, for personal contact and personal service awake true charity. The activities of the national organization, carried on through its members, testify the force of this principle demonstrated in our work." She then went on to say, "We are the shepherds of the lambs of the flock. Can we not hear them bleating in the dark corners of the street, huddled together where there is neither light nor water? It is for us to lead them to the light of these. Of these Christ said, 'They see the face of my Father who is in heaven.'" Mary Virginia Merrick exemplifies the professionalization of charity, as women of means and education found their involvement with charity as a career opportunity, and she achieved this within the framework of the Catholic Church as a lay woman in an era of new Catholic social reformers. It can certainly be said that Mary Virginia Merrick led a life of virtue, both socially and spiritually, as she was recognized by social work professionals and members of the Catholic faith alike. Her message in support of conscience, in the rejection of materialism, and her acknowledgement of human dignity remain as relevant today as they did in the early 20th century. Her good friend Mary Hawkes once said, "It was her own suffering that linked Mary to the poor. As a child from an established family, Mary could pity the poor, but never truly understand them. It was through this suffering that she joined their ranks, and from their ranks that God raised her to their defense." We certainly can't talk about the history of our society without looking at our spiritual roots, as she was unable to separate her spirituality from the works of the society. When she was asked by her friend and confidant to write the story of her soul, she could only focus on the growth and development of the society, as this was such an intimate part of her inner life and relationship with God that she could not separate the two. We must also remember that due to the back injury from her fall and the Pott's disease that further paralyzed her legs and spine, she lived a life of constant pain. She said, "Suffering had grown familiar to me in those years. It was no longer a strange face. Endurance had taken the place of surprise. There was in my soul nothing heroic, no great elan of acceptance of my cross. My attitude of soul, as far as I can recall, was merely one of endurance. I recall that I awoke every morning to the realization of pain and suffering. It was impossible to get away from the suffering by night or day, and I suffered it, that was all. In those days, I was considered very patient. I have always suffered pain patiently, I think, and helplessness very impatiently." Through the work of the Christ Child Society, Mary Virginia Merrick emerged as a national figure in the landscape of American Catholic reform. The journey that began with small acts of generosity and a young girl's desire to serve the poor children of her city. This young girl, physically burdened but spiritually buoyed, grew with her organization to see it become a national force for lay Catholic social reform. The Christ Child Society brought thousands of Catholic lay women into the homes and neighborhoods of the poor. Her programs reached out to immigrants and minorities in a time when they were truly marginalized. Her life and work afford us a useful lens through which we can view the place of her incarnational spirituality and its role in charity and social reform, affording opportunities for Catholic lay women and men to engage in charitable activities and themselves encounter Jesus Christ in the poor. Upon hearing of her death, Patrick Aloysius Cardinal O'Boyle issued a statement. Miss Mary Merrick's long life was an inspiring expression of the power and beauty of Christian charity. She saw the image of the infant Savior in every poor child, and it was the Christ child who conferred upon her a long life of amazing, successful activity that defied an almost lifelong infirmity. It was inevitable that she established the Christ Child Society, both in spirit and accomplishment. No society has better deserved its sublime name. Miss Mary, from her bed of pain, perpetually dynamic and devoted, has a lesson for everyone who professes to be a follower of Christ. On the occasion of the solemn Requiem Mass in her memory, it was honored by the presence of His Holy Excellency, the Apostolic Delegate, by His Excellency, the Archbishop of Washington, by Auxiliary Bishop John McNamara, 3 other bishops, and many priests. Bishop John McNamara, in his sermon at our funeral mass, said, "The memory of this good woman is a treasure which all who esteem what is noble, what is inspiring, and what is good value as a pearl of price. When you think of the happiness she brought to the hearts and homes of the poor, of the opportunities for doing good she provided for those who share her labors, when you reflect on the obstacles she overcame, the while she labored throughout the past 50 years of her life, braced in hoops of iron, and when you recall that throughout all those years she directed the Christ Child Society in the founding of chapters, in the erection of buildings, and in the establishment of camps, you will find yourself face to face with a woman, the like of whom is seldom met in this, our mortal life." He then went on to say, and so it was that she took her cross, and out of it fashioned a bridge over which she and others would walk on their way to God. And later, in truth, we are here, one and all, not only to honor her memory, but to acknowledge ourselves her debtors for the example of a holy, a heroic, and inspiring life. May we cherish her memory and keep her in our prayers. It is our prayers she would have, rather than our praise, since she would be the last to claim freedom from the faults and imperfections that are common to us all. Mary's obituary in the Washington Post in 1955 stated, "This woman in a wheelchair weighed scarcely more than 80 pounds. Yet there was concentrated in this waif of a woman tremendous infectious strength for good. She had the power given to few of making everyone she touched a little happier, and often even a little better, having known her." Although her physical condition severely limited her movement, the Mass was always her primary devotion. When in public, she wanted not to be different from the rest of the world, and she made heroic attempts to attend Mass, and she often had the Blessed Sacrament brought to her when she couldn't. Cardinal Gibbons and every local bishop after him had granted permission for Mass to be celebrated in her home. However, she preferred to attend her parish church whenever she was able. Growing up, I had the privilege of belonging to Mary Virginia Merrick's home parish, the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament. I have vivid memories of seeing her at Mass on several occasions. I remember that when she was there was a different feeling in the church. All seemed aware that a holy person was present. They seemed to sit up straighter, sing louder, and pray harder. The only other time that I experienced a similar feeling was when I had the privilege of being at Mass when Mother Teresa was there. You knew that you were in the presence of a saint. Like with Mary Virginia Merrick, you could feel her holiness in the air. For her, the incarnation, the process by which the Word of God became flesh in the Christ child, was a vivid reality. She said that it was the intellectual vision of the incarnation that served as the foundation for her society. For her, the society would always be first and foremost an organization devoted to the incarnation through service for love of the Christ child to his little ones, For her, the reason why the work was done was never open to debate. Miss Mary had a deep love and devotion to the Blessed Mother. This love and devotion began at a very early age, and later led her to wear only blue and white clothing. She spent time each morning in private prayer, and it has been noted that she often talked to God out loud, as though he were sitting beside her in her room. At the age of 11, during the family's second summer at Linwood, she had an experience in a wheat field, which she describes in her autobiography. I would like to share her experience with you today. I had evaded my nurse and was walking quite alone down the lane of maples at Linwood. I recall thinking with pleasure that I was quite alone and far from the house, though it was not far. To my right lay a wheat field. The ears were ripe and bent under her load and swayed in the evening breeze, and over it lay the slanting rays of the setting sun, a golden, beautiful wheat field, which spoke to me of the Creator of all things. I turned aside from the lane and went knee-deep into the wheat, with my heart afire with eagerness to find him in beauty before me, as if I might with fast-flying feet meet him there. And then I found him in my inner soul consciousness, and walked no further, but knelt in the wheat field and bowed my head to the ground and adored the Creator of all. I was not adoring beauty, nor order, nor the wheat, nor the sun, but really and truly he who had made all things, the God of earth and sky. I can vividly recall that I was one with the vast creation, a plaything in his hands, that he was so great and I so small, but that I could know him, though the wheat could not. So little was I that the tall spears quite cover me as I knelt, and I thought they bowed with me to the great God whom I loved and to whom I gave myself then and there. She then goes on to say, I think this was the first time I adored in spirit and in truth, without noise or word, and I returned home directly, no thought of wandering any further, and there was joy in my heart, as if I had found a great treasure. Later, when experiencing long moments of illness or pain, she came to see experience great beauty in even the smallest things in nature, and said, I think by the great law of compensation, he gave me delight in such pleasures. She saw him in all, in the perfect rose and the sunsets viewed from her carriage in the garden, in the songs of the birds she heard, and in the wildflowers that others brought to her for her to enjoy. She wore a brave public face to lead the work of the Christ Child Society. This bravery was a gift from the Christ Child himself, and she was the first to acknowledge that gift and be grateful for it. In her writing, she often refers to God's grace as what makes the burden light. Her friend Mary Hawkes once said that her inner fire, mental activity, and temporal accomplishments put to rest any notion that this reclining woman was frail. She was constantly pulled between her desire for total dependence on God and her struggle for personal independence. A friend, Mary Daly, spoke of Mary Merrick's quiet strength in an article published in the Catholic Standard Bicentennial Series in 1976. She wrote, physical strength, however, was the only strength Miss Mary lacked. Always dressed in soft blue and white, her bright blue eyes alive with intelligence and good humor, wispy white hair gathered in a knot at the back of her head, which had to be supported by a harness to ease the weight off the spine. She exuded a spirit of buoyancy in her soft, high-pitched voice. With the acumen of a Wall Street banker, she weighed and made decisions on everything, from the purchase of footballs to real estate. A charm that combined the easy affability of a trained diplomat with the practical common sense of a truly loving mother made everyone who knew Miss Mary realize that here was one of God's chosen, a saint canonized or not. Mary often said, the Christ Child Society was set in motion by love, and love is a mighty impetus. It can certainly be said that Mary Virginia Merrick exemplified in her life the truth that any person can accomplish the extraordinary by answering God's call to holiness. She was an intrepid, single, disabled woman who dedicated 67 years to helping poor children through foundational social work out of her personal love of the Christ Child. She was a pioneer in lay apostolate and she believed firmly in the importance of lay organization and lay action in the service of the Catholic Church. She believed that if the society rested on a lay foundation, its continued activity would encourage the laity to develop themselves more fully. Yes, she was the seed, and today you and your chapters are the branches. What has grown from that seed, from her spark, should lead us all to greater holiness as we continue to live out her legacy through our own volunteer work for love of the Christ child. Through our personal service to children in our communities, we are now Mary Virginia Merrick's heart, her hands, and her feet in today's world, and we must never forget her charge that nothing is ever too much to do for a child. I am privileged now to have this opportunity to share with you a newly enhanced audio recording of Mary Virginia Merrick addressing her members in 1949. This audio is also a bit hard to hear, so I invite you to listen, as well as read along with her words shown on the slide.
It is the spirit that quickens, the spirit that giveth life. This is exemplified in the development of the Christ Child Society. It has grown from a small seed, like the mustard seed our Lord spoke of in the Gospel, until now it has become a tree, sheltering many little ones, because it was inspired by love. You asked me to tell you the beginnings of the world. It is love that brings the sun and moon and stars. That same love touched the way of the great little one daughter whose coming turned to earth like today. When I was very young, I longed to shield his infant limbs from the cold of the manger. If only I could find him. Quickly the answer came to equal my desire. Inasmuch as you do it unto one of the least of these little ones, you do it unto me.
I thank you for your time and interest today, and I invite you to read more about Mary Virginia Merrick on both the NCCS and the Mary Virginia Merrick websites. Please feel free to email me with any questions you may have. Thank you.